think we have a problem.
We have a lot of problems. Which one?
I think we possibly have a sampler problem.
Mm-hmm.
I think realising that we did possibly a 600-mile round trip this last few weeks, we might have a bit of a problem. Because we might have more than one.
More than one?
Mm.
Yeah, we have a few more than one.
Why would I have so many samplers?
Because you got a problem. You said that a minute ago. I've got a problem. That's why we've got so many samples. You don't stop buying the fucking things.
No, but you can't tell anybody that bit.
All right. You just told everybody.
I've got to have a reason.
All right. Yeah, it's a question we get a lot on Facebook, isn't it, when they look at the studio pictures. Why do you have so many samplers?
Yeah.
It's because they all have a slightly different sound. No, I mean, obviously, if you get the same model sampler, they sound the same. But when you look at the range and you say, well, the S1000 sounds very different to the S3200 and the S3000 sounds very different to the S950. So they all sound different.
How do they sound different? What makes them sound different? You can tell me what bit of magic is inside the box now that makes them sound different.
Nothing, it's just magic. Well, I don't want to get too far into this. I don't want to bore people. What it was is the S950, the Akai S950 was the first sampler to come out. And I think it was 1988, 1989. Don't quote me on this, I'm just saying it. It was the first sampler to come out with time stretching.
Okay.
And it was a 12-bit sampler. The internal processing's a bit higher than that, but it actually samples at 12-bit. And then we get the S1000 and the S1100. Now, both of those samplers that were released after the S950 both use something called 8-point sync windowed interpolation. It's just basically the way you transpose samples. With 8-point windowed, it sounds very good when you play it low down. And one of the great things that people noticed about the S1000 and the S1100, as the prices start to rise on eBay now, is...
Shucks, have I got enough? Have I got enough?
is that when you put a clipped sample into something, what would happen is if you played it lower down on the keyboard, the interpolation will kick in because it's 8-bit, and it would kind of act as an exciter, and it would really excite the sound, and it would create a sound that you couldn't get any other way. And what happened is that after the S1000 and the S1100, as technology evolved, Akai came along and released their next models, which were the 3200 and so on and so forth. And in that, they put 2-point linear interpolation in, which is nowhere near as good as the 8-point interpolation. It sounds very, very different. It sounds very clean. It's okay, but you're going to find with 2-point, you've got to sample every few keys to get a really nice sound. Whereas with 8-point, you could sample once, and you could play it 2 octaves down, it'd still sound fucking great. So there's a reason that we have specific samplers, because they all sound slightly different. They all have different converters. Like the S1000 has slightly dirtier converters than the S1100, but the S1100 has the effects card that is typical of 90s house music.
So are you saying that in a way that they're just a computer in a box?
Well, of sorts, yes. But the thing is, a lot of people compare these to computers and say, oh, well, I could just do it on the computer.
Yeah, I was just going to say, actually, why even buy a sampler then if I could do it on the computer?
Well, I'm not going to go into...
Well, it is a computer.
Well, yeah, it is a form of computer, but I'm not going to get into tactility of interfaces now. But there is a significant difference. The Akai samplers, they are a sampler. It's not a computer pretending to be a sampler or emulating a sampler. It is a sampler. And all those chips inside that sampler are all written at the lowest level of machine code. So that sampler is going to work its best as a sampler.
Okay.
Whereas a computer just pretends to be a sampler. It just kind of borrows ideas from it. It's a bit like Inception. You know, when you open a sampler in a door, it's a computer pretending to be a door, and inside that door it's got another one pretending to be a sampler. So there's a form of inception going on. So samplers just work better. Hardware samplers just naturally sound better.
So how then, when we look at software, if we look at software like Contact, which can have huge 80 gigabyte libraries inside them, we do not have that kind of memory in a sampler. We have a teeny weeny little piece of memory, which makes it very exciting, and I love that. Well, is it not better to have the huge 80 gigabyte memory?
Well, I have a conspiracy theory here.
Oh, go on. Oh my gosh. So now we've reported our problem with collecting samplers. And now you've actually confessed into a conspiracy. Oh my gosh, they'll have you locked up next week. Go on, though.
Well, they only let me out this week. This is my own conspiracy theory. Feel free to take it or leave it.
Go on, hang on a minute. I just need to put my tinfoil hat on.
Yeah. I seriously believe that it's record labels that are responsible for all the software samplers today. Now, the reason I say that is because it's not serious. No, I mean this seriously. When we look back at samplers, I think the first case of a court case against samplers was in 1989. It might have been De La Soul with 2 Feet High and Rising, I think it was, okay. And a group called the Turtles sued him. They tried to sue him over sampling some of their music on one of his records. It was settled out of court, so nobody really knows. But the thing is, when we first started sampling things back in the 1980s, or the late 1980s and the early 90s, when we were sampling stuff, record labels really didn't know what was going on. So it was like a free-for-all. But in a good way. I mean, I think that a society free to culturally appropriate from the past is far richer than one that can't.
Gives you more creativity, doesn't it?
It does. So we were sampling everybody and we were bringing things in. We were coming up with loads of music. And what happened, I find, is that as record companies drop more and more onto us saying, oh, you can't sample this, you can't sample that, and they caught up very quickly. That, for me, when you look at the history of samplers, started to spell the decline of the hardware sampler. More and more started to disappear, and I think it was 94, 95 when Akai started, reducing the line of samplers down to 0. And that's around the time when every record label was well onto the case. Now, we fast forward to today, and when you look at a software sampler in a DAW, they're all really butt ugly. I mean, you open Logic and you open the EXS24 sampler, I've never seen anything as ugly as that. No. You look at Contact, I'm colourblind, but I'm assuming it's got rather vivid colours. It's an ugly thing to look at. The writing's tiny. Yeah. You look at Presonus, look in there, the sampler it just looks disgusting. Yeah. And then you open Ableton Simpler or whatever they decided to call it. Well, I mean, everything in Ableton looks horrible. It looks like it was designed by a team of accountants. Every time I open Ableton here, I don't know whether to drag a loop in or drag my accounts in. It's just a disgusting-looking interface. But whenever I open a sampler in software, I look at it and I get that, I've got to work with this now. It's like having to go and spend an hour with Gerald, the accountant. You're going to come out with something good at the end of it, but you don't want to go in and speak to him for an hour. And it's the same thing when I'm using a software sampler. It's like, oh, for fuck's sake, I've got to work with that, have I? They're all So I think record labels have done it so nobody wants to sample anything. But anyway, to answer your question...
Do you think they bought up all the old samplers then?
Possibly.
Or made it that manufacturers didn't want to produce them?
It could be. They could have paid off Akai, couldn't they, to
really
disappear?
Go down.
We could go down a rabbit hole of conspiracy theories here.
God away.
But to answer your question, it's fine having an 80 gig sample library in Contact. I use Contact, and I'm pretty sure that I'm not the only one that treats Contact as just like this machine that I'll drag those samples in and I'll write this string section and then I'm going to bin it. I don't think many people actually sample into Contact because it's a pain in the ass. It's really, really convoluted to use, I find. I find a hardware sampler is much easier. Yes, a hardware sampler has less memory, but then again, it makes me more creative. I mean, in the old days, the memory was so limited. What we used to do is we used to take a drum loop, speed it up, sample it so it took up less memory, and then slow it down in the sampler because that was the way that you'd save memory. And it was far more
clever. That
it was far more creative to do things like that than when we've got unlimited resources. I don't think we're anywhere near as creative as we should be.
It's part of the process, isn't it? It's part of the enjoyment.
Well, for me, limitation breeds creativity. If you limit yourself to a certain number of plugins in your DAW, which nobody does anymore, but if you did, you'll find yourself far more creative because, well, I don't have that tool, so I'm going to have to be creative and come up with something. And I think as we've got more and more tools available, people are digging themselves a hole and becoming less and less creative because they've just got too much going on in the DAW. It's like you look at your compressor list, you go, I've got 307 compressors, which one shall I use today? And the problem that I find today as well is that nobody labels them as attack, release, threshold, ratio. It's all like whump, thump, crack, power, turbo. What the fuck is a turbo on it? I've got a compressor down there, and he says turbo. What the fuck is a turbo? And you get people coming to a studio then and looking at a real compressor and go, where's your turbo button? Well, I haven't fucking got one because this is a compressor. It's not a fucking toy. Let me whoomp that and turbo that up. I'm just going to whoomp this. Let me add a bit more whoomp and boom. Where's me boom button? It's got a fucking threshold, for fuck's sake.
So, talking about the fact that you're very limited, I remember you describing using some old equipment with some very small LCD screens as though you were painting through a letterbox.
As though I was painting a hallway through a letterbox.
Exactly.
That actually comes from the JV 1080, which was way back in, I don't know, in the 90s sometime. Roland released this module. There was a fantastic module. I don't know who wrote the manual for that, but it was absolutely terrible. I think it was written by an atomic scientist on drugs because it made no sense. I thought I was reading about atoms rather than a computer. But you have to try and program that through this little 2-screen LCD thing, and you had no clue what was going on. It's just like T1B190. What the fuck does that mean? But yeah. It can be like that on some of the very old equipment, but you're going to find that when Akai went to the S1000 and the S11000, the screens got very big. And if you open an S1000, you can actually see the envelope shapes as you begin to change it. So with samplers, you don't really fall into that trap of the really, really older kind of gear where they were cutting it down to save a bit of money.
Yeah. I think one of the nice things as well about the old gear is the way it feels when you're using it. When you're touching when you're just on the door, it's not the same as it. You've got.
Well, it's a mouse. It's touching a mouse, isn't it? Yeah. The old gear has very positive action.
So in this instance, old is best.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the problem is that people say, "Oh, this is one of the things I have with hardware." People are always looking on eBay for the latest hardware or try to buy the latest piece of hardware. And it's like, well, it never worked like that. Back in the day, if you look at how house music evolved, it started with the TB303 and the TR909 and the TR808. Now, the TB303 was originally designed as a bass accompaniment for people who played in pubs. But the problem is that it just sounded so farty.
It does.
You listen to a 303, it sounds like a wet fart. So obviously, the guy in the pub's like, I'm not playing that. I was going to think I've shit myself while I'm trying to play. So they didn't pick up on it. But these house musicians thought, well, screw that. I don't care if I sound like I've got a bit of flatulence. I'm gonna buy one of them. I'm gonna have a go because they were really cheap. We need that attitude today. We need to get rid of the attitude that, oh, well, I must buy it brand new. I mean, what's annoying me at the moment, which is perhaps for another podcast, are the re-releases of Roland. Oh, here's another TB303. Behringer, here's another TB303. Do we need another TB303? I mean, Fatboy Slim, obviously, that we did. But personally, I don't. I think we should go on eBay, pick up the old stuff and see what we can do with it. Take inspiration from the pioneers of electronic dance music rather than taking inspiration from the manufacturers who try to sell you shit.
But like you say, we've got a situation where we have possibly some people will have far too many plugins, or they buy the new modern cheap little samplers, which, like you said, there's nothing wrong with them, but then they have more than one, and they never ever become a master of that one piece of hardware. Because they've got so many of that piece of software, they've got so many to choose between and play with, and
Oh yeah.
Whereas if you limit yourself to, I mean, I know I've confessed having a bit of an issue of collecting Akais. We all have our problems, and that's mine. But it is good, isn't it, to sometimes just get one and really learn about it, how it works, what sounds you can get from it, and have fun.
Yeah, jack of all trades and shit at all of them. That's what they used to say. Back in the day, although I'm going to sound really old now, what we used to do is there was no DAW. I mean, when I went to college, we learned to splice tape because you couldn't splice it in audio. You couldn't actually put audio in a computer and cut it up. That was like, wow, that's amazing. We used to splice tape together. But back then, because there was no plugins or anything like that, you buy a piece of hardware, and while you were saving up to buy this hardware, you read everything about it. You try and get hold of the instruction book, you read magazine reviews, everything you could about it. You'd save up, you'd buy it, and then while you were saving up for your next piece of kit, you would learn it inside out. I know it inside out. And although you're saying we've got 14, 15 samplers there, they all run basically the same operating system. You can use one Akai, you can use all of them, and they all sound different. So master one, you master them all. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think the problem is that people tend to think, well, I'm going to get this plugin, that plugin, that plugin, that plugin, this plugin, that plugin, and they're stealing them off the internet or wherever they're getting them from, downloading them all, throwing them all in the door, and they're spending more time arranging and putting them in folders and sorting them out and zipping them up and naming them than they are actually producing the fucking music. With us now, when we have somebody in who wants a job here, we sit them down, ask what the door of choice is, and if it's Logic or Ableton or Pro Tools or whatever, sit them in front of that door and say, you got 3 hours, write a track, go.
Yeah.
There's no third-party plugins, it's just a basic DAW. And if you can't write a track in 3 hours in a basic DAW, at least get the skeleton down of a nice-sounding track with the plugins you have available, you can't write a track, regardless of what you buy.
It just shows if they've got skills or not.
Yeah, it's the skill to be able to work within a confined environment and within a time.
So other than having a skill to create music from my samplers, what other skills would you say I need? The samplers.
Well, the ability to use them, really. The only other skill would be servicing. I mean, this is old gear. We're talking old tech now, and it's difficult to get hold of parts of them. I mean, eBay has the occasional thing if you're willing to import from Japan. But you've just got to have a bit of nous about it. You've got to be able to undo a few screws, which I'm finding a lot of people today are incapable of doing. But open a few screws, lift the lid off, look inside, and figure a few things out. The only real things that go wrong on the Akais are the screen. The screen was actually just a simple LCD screen, and it had what we call an electroluminescence panel that sits behind it, and that would illuminate the screen from behind. That usually goes and makes a whistling sound when it goes. And on top of that, you may find some of the outputs don't work. Now, that can be repaired by buying another sampler. It's cheaper to buy another sampler and take bits out of that and fix it so the outputs work.
Okay.
So just some basic servicing skills. It's not difficult. There's not a lot going on in there.
No, and there is nothing more satisfying. I mean, I personally find this if I have pulled the samplers out the rack, given them serviced them, cleaned them, and put them back together, and they still work.
Well, yeah. There's always that. But have you ever noticed? I've noticed this. Yeah. When you strip something down, when you strip something down and you rebuild it, you always have a few parts left over. So I've hit the theory now that if I strip enough samplers down and rebuild them, I'll save enough parts eventually to build another sampler.
Yes.
I can clone them. If you strip something down and rebuild it enough, you get another one.
Where would you recommend I purchased a sampler from?
eBay. It's probably the only place you're going to find them now.
Is there anything in particular that you would recommend I look out for when I'm? Yeah, I mean, I've saved my money up, and I've been eyeing up different samplers on eBay. There's a few out there, I could bid on. What am I looking for? What are the two key things I need to be aware of?
First of all, check that it's working. I don't think there's anything worse than buying a broken sampler and thinking you can fix it because you can't. You just end up with a piece of shit sat in the corner. Your partner's like, what's that piece of shit sat there for? It's never plugged in. You're going to throw it away. It ends up in the tip. So I wouldn't buy a broken sampler. I'd try and make sure it works, and just make sure it's got memory. Because, I mean, the problem is that memory is hard to come by now, so to try and get it stacked. But don't expect to get 80 gig of memory in these things. You know what I mean? 8 megabytes is plenty in these. 8 megabyte of memory, 4 meg. I mean, I can work with 2 meg. You don't need a massive amount of memory. We're not using Contact here. We're just putting simple samples in and playing around with them.
Okay. That's some nice advice then for me to remember when I'm actually looking at the different.
I think you've got enough. You're not having another fucking one. Where are we going to put it? Just start stacking them outside. Don't use that sampler, right? Fuck off outside. You have to use it out there, mate. It's in the shed. Put them in the bathroom. You see. I'm sat here having a shit playing with the sampler. Where did you write that one? Oh, right, having a shit.
So, as we're talking about samplers, and you've now given me the perfect advice to how to buy one and what I need to know about when I bought one, how servicing it and everything. I possibly will ask Santa for another sampler.
Oh God, no.
Well, if you don't ask, you don't get.
Well, we can always advertise it. Come here, have a shit and write a song at the same time.
Well, we do say that we're unique.
Yeah. I thought it was boutique, not unique. You wouldn't want to touch it though, would you? Like, everybody's wiping their ass and then touch that button there. I'm not sure I want to touch that anymore. Is that supposed to be brown, that button?
So, as I say, I'm going to ask Santa for another sampler no matter what. Because if I don't ask, I won't get. But as it's Christmas music, it's on the radio all the time. It winds me up. But have you ever written or produced one?
I can tell by the way you're looking at me. You've researched this, haven't you?
I promise never to discuss this ever again. I'll just ask it this once. Have you ever written or produced one?
I have never written or produced a Christmas single.
But? So you've been involved in one.
Who told you this?
I have my ways.
No, I was young and in need of money.
Didn't you say that about an advert?
What the... Yes, I did do commercial music just once. You're not going to drop that, are you? Oh, dear.
So is there a secret formula to writing a Christmas track with all your knowledge and experience?
The secret to writing a Christmas track, first of all, is you can't speak about anything religious. I think the last song to use religion was Boney M back in the 1970s, which was Jesus and the Mary Child. Or Mary Child and Jesus, or whatever the song was, I can't remember it. But Boney M, that was the last time really to mention a religious kind of scene in music. And since then, after political correctness has taken hold, we don't really say that. When we sing, you've got to sing about mistletoe, Yuletide, logs, a burning fire, a Christmas tree,
red wine,
snow, wine, things like that. We sing about those. And if you listen to records today, that's what they sing about. But the big trick is you can't have a Christmas hit if you're not a famous person. To get a Christmas hit, you've got to be famous before the Christmas hit. You're not going to find somebody out of the blue who's going to get a Christmas hit. And also, we need sleigh bells on every 8th, because sleigh bells on every 8th kind of give the impression of reindeer prancing through the snow. And then we also use strings to create... This is what I was told. Don't look at me like that. We use strings to give the impression of snow falling, and we'll use sounds that kind of set the scene, the wallpaper of the room.
Okay, so using sounds to set the scene. When you were doing this...
I never said I was doing anything.
Well,
when your friend
was doing this, did they wear a Christmas jumper?
No.
On that note, we shall leave everybody in peace and let them go and enjoy their Christmas.
Yes, have a good... You can't say Christmas, it's a holiday. Happy holidays.
Have a very nice festive season.